Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger with the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our webcast with our founder and president, Helga Zepp LaRouche. It's October 6th, 2019, and there's a lot to talk about today. We're in the midst of an escalation of various regime change operations, and I think we'll start with the one in the United States, the operation against President Trump, which he correctly identified as a coup, not an impeachment. Helga, what is going on here with this?
Well, I think it is very remarkable that the President of the United States says that this is a coup against him. And I think this deserves reflection, because if you listen to the mainstream media, at least in Europe, you would absolutely not think that that's a possibility, because the mainstream media here are so absolutely 100% against Trump. But what he said is enormous, because this is not just words. We know that the Attorney General Barr and also Attorney Durham went to Italy. They are now investigating the MIFSUD role in setting up the former Trump aide Papadopoulos. Then the reports will come out from Durham, from Barr, probably also from Horowitz. So a lot of evidence will come out. And if that's not enough, Trump said, given the fact that 2 years were wasted with the Russiagate, after which absolutely nothing came out, $42 million taxpayer money was wasted. So he is planning to do a litigation himself. So even if these reports would not surface all the involvement of foreign governments, but not the Russian government. But what will come out is that there was an involvement between Biden and the Ukrainian government of Poroshenko. So I think this has the potential of really causing an earthquake, where all these people who have been involved in this coup may face some very, very big surprises. And if this comes out, which can happen very shortly, I think an earthquake will go through the entire world, but especially, rocking the transatlantic liberal establishment, who all somehow were, supportive of this coup, at least in attitude. So this is a really big story, and I think we will go in for some big, big surprises.
I think what's important also is that when Trump spoke the other day, he identified not just Ukraine, but the United Kingdom, Australia, and Italy minimally as being involved, as well as the Obama administration. So this gets right to the heart of the setup that was run from the British with Christopher Steele, GCHQ, MI6, working with the Obama team, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, the big question naturally will be, what did Obama know and when? So one can say for sure that Joe Biden's presidential ambitions are already as good as finished, because Trump has now not only requested that the Ukrainian government should investigate the involvement of Biden and his son Hunter with Burisma, this oil and gas corporation, which is a has been investigated for many things in Ukraine already. So Zelensky said that that will happen. Trump has also demanded that the Chinese government should look into what happened in 2013, when Joe Biden and his son were involved in a $1.5 billion operation in China. So this is perfectly the right of President Trump to do. The Democrats naturally try to make that again a story, saying he's trying to collude now with China and with Ukraine. But he, as a president, has the right to determine what is going on. And if there was a coup, he has all the right in the world to investigate how it happened.
Now, Helga, as one who's been commenting on this and working on it for some time, I'd like to get your thoughts on a simple question that should be asked, but very few people are asking, which is why the sudden rush to judgment? The so-called whistleblowers report was out in one day, and the next day there were impeachment calls. The inquiry was started. Pelosi shifted her position. What's really behind this?
Well, I can only make an hypothesis because the facts of this are not yet established. But Pelosi, who otherwise naturally has been close to the intelligence community for her entire political life, nevertheless insisted against the left wing of the Democratic Party that impeachment was a losing proposition for the Democrats because the voters in 2020 absolutely have other concerns than yet another scandal against Trump, because they want to know, what's about their jobs, what's about healthcare. And if the Democrats are only going against the president, which after all has still a very high popularity and has a hardcore of supporters and many people who are, in a swing mood, they could go this way or that way. Pelosi so far argued that it was too risky to go for impeachment. Now, why did she change her position, and why did this whistleblower occur, who many people think he's a CIA agent? Now, Pelosi went to New York. This was in the context of this Bloomberg finance conference. We don't know exactly whom she met, but then she came back and she all of a sudden was for impeachment. Now, the only hypothesis one can put forward is that she met with some of the top Wall Street banking circles, and they basically told her that the Wall Street would not finance the Democratic candidates in the upcoming campaign. And since a congressman in the United States needs at least $5 million to have any chance, given the present plutocracy system, which is very far from a democracy, naturally that argument is overwhelming. So she basically came out for impeachment. But this is a big, big risk. It can completely backfire, and many people know that. There were actually several voices already saying this may end up with a lot of tears for the establishment.
While the regime change coup is escalating in the United States, there's another place where it's now clear the intention is regime change, and that's Hong Kong. This has just deteriorated as we've seen more violence and brutality from the so-called demonstrators. What's your view of what's happening there?
Well, I think the New York Times is an article by Stephen Brett, who, by the way, in his former capacity as chief editor of the Jerusalem Post, Jerusalem Post, had given the prize of the Man of the Year to Wolfowitz for his involvement in the Iraq War in 2003. So you have a real hawk of the worst neocon tradition. So he had an article in the New York Times with the headline, will this Hong Kong situation mean the total crisis for China, or something like that, where he basically says, that, China is already having enormous trouble, that capital is leaving China, and now this Hong Kong thing is bringing it over the edge, that Xi Jinping's dream to have a modern, well-to-do China is all going up in smoke, and that the BRI is not functioning. So it's an open call unveiled for regime change. And naturally, given the fact that the Chinese media in the meantime have covered a lot of, the sources of this funding of the opposition, the NED, National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA, the NED bragged that they trained a lot of the opposition leaders. And then to top it all, Chris Patten, former last governor of Hong Kong, when it still was a British colony, he came out and called on the opposition in Hong Kong to form an alternative government, to charge then the police and the Beijing with crimes and so forth. Now, I think this is an incredible thing. Now, this Sir Leon Britton, I I have on my radar for a very long time, because in '96, when there was this first major conference on the Eurasian land bridge in Beijing, which I participated in as a speaker, presenting our proposal for the new Silk Road, the Eurasian land bridge. Sir Leon Brittan was at that conference also, and actually he personally had delayed the emergence of this conference by more than 2 years by always arguing, that he had no time. And since the Chinese wanted the EU involved, he was actually able to postpone this conference for all that time. And then the speech he gave was really a declaration of war against the new Silk Road, by saying, this will not function because there will be terrorism and there will be instability along all these routes. So he already unveiled the British policy against the new Silk Road, which has not changed and is now becoming very, very apparent in Hong Kong. So I think that the Chinese government probably should appeal to the United Nations, or basically say that if significant forces of the British side are demanding an alternative government should be formed, then maybe the deal, which supposedly still lasts till 1947, when Hong Kong is supposed to be integrated into the mainland, and the present status of one country, two systems is supposed to be replaced, maybe that is now putting that deal in question. And there should be right now a vote, because it's not that the Hong Kong population is all like that. This is a very virulent and loud minority using terrorist means, everything from Molotov cocktails, pipes, and if you look at the video footage which exists of this 18-year-old which was shot, and which the Western media then claimed this was all police violence, these people, they were absolutely on a terrorist rampage, and it was self-defense by the police. So I think what is probably advisable, that the role of the British should be documented by the Chinese even more than they have done so. They already had articles saying now what Britain did with the Opium Wars, which after all is the reason why Hong Kong went into the British Empire in the first place. That ugly face is now showing itself again. So I think this is a very, very unbelievable color revolution, regime change operation. But I think it's completely ludicrous to think that that will endanger the government in Beijing, which is absolutely in a strong position. And they just had the beautiful celebration of the 70th anniversary of the PRC. So I think this is a completely desperate, ludicrous attempt, but it shows you the absolute viciousness of these forces.
Well, Helga, that leads me right into the next question, which is if you look at the Western media and listen to the usual voices in the Western politicians and others, they're trying to make the case that China is weak, its economy is collapsing, Xi is going for top-down dictatorship. There's a lot of opposition, but you were just there. You've been participating in events there over a period of time. Is there any truth to that image that they're trying to present?
Well, I have no indication that there is anything like this going on at all, because as you just mentioned, I was in China, in Beijing in May. I participated in the Asian Dialogue of Civilization. Then I was there in September, where I participated in the Euro-Asia Economic Forum in Xi'an. I had many discussions, and people are happy. People are absolutely proud to be Chinese. They're self-confident. They know what they have done. The Chinese economic miracle is the greatest transformation of any country from a state of extreme poverty into a well-to-do country. They have gotten 800 million people out of poverty. They want to have the elimination of extreme poverty completely until next year. And given their record, I'm absolutely confident that they will succeed in doing that. Now, I mean, look, this is not in an abstract space. I mean, China has launched the Belt and Road Initiative. More than 130 countries are participating in it in one way or another, with memorandums of understanding, with great projects, with all kinds of agreements. And China gets the resonance from these countries. And I have observed this with my own eyes and ears, that in general, you know, what was the condition of Africa, Asia, Latin America before China entered the world stage in such a big way in the last 10 and especially the last 5, 6 years? There was absolutely no hope for the developing sector to overcome and get out of this terrible poverty which left, you know, which they were left in with the end of colonialism and then the following IMF conditionalities. It was only when China started to invest in infrastructure, in railroads, in, you know, industrial parks, in agriculture, that these countries have a clear perspective of overcoming poverty. And this is just more attractive. I mean, the West is claiming, you know, all this democracy and human rights and so forth, and that they are the only owners of a rules-based order. Now, a rules-based order is, I have an image of that, and that looks like Wolfgang Schäuble, you know, who with his Black Zero has made all the economies of Southern Europe completely unhappy. He reduced them by 1/3. And, you know, they have prevented, the EU Commission has prevented any kind of development in the Balkans, in the Southern Europe. And that is what they call a rules-based order. Now, that is not an attractive model. So the Chinese naturally know all of this, and they know that they have improved the life of not only the Chinese population, but that many other countries have studied and are now imitating the way how China has overcome this poverty and has, you know, entered a path of development towards becoming a middle class economy for the majority of their citizens. And this is causing optimism. So I don't think that there is any truth to this matter. Sure, China has economic difficulties as a result of the trade war, as a result of Hong Kong. This is a big factor, but I don't think it has any chance at all to to change this government, because they have the full support of the population, which is very the population who is very thankful and identifies with the course of politics in China. That is my direct observation, and that is the best I can say.
And just one final point on this, the people who are saying China's collapsing are watching the Western neoliberal model actually undergoing a collapse, as we've seen in recent days with the repo liquidity crisis and so on. So do you have anything to say about that?
Well, you know, we are now in October. So in 3 weeks or so, there is likely the Brexit. As of now, one cannot see how this thing can be resolved in any way, even if they postpone it until the end of the year. This is a completely unworkable thing, and, you know, who knows what will happen, because I don't think they have it under control at all. Then you have the derivative crisis, which is lingering. There was just a warning article in Wall Street on Parade that, you know, the big insurance companies are all still involved in massive derivative tradings. They did not change that after 2008. So this is just one more of the many mines which could detonate. And we saw with the Thomas Cook, you know, that this is having all kinds of reverberations in all the countries which had these touristic business, Spain, Greece, Turkey, all of them, hotels and so forth, suffer. So this is a powder keg, and it just absolutely makes the point that the proposals of my late husband to have a new Bretton Woods system and go for global Glass-Steagall, this is the only way to go, which is why we have to absolutely stop this regime change operation against Trump and against China, because only if these two strongest economies are working together, plus some other countries, you have any chance to get out of this crisis without a big chaos.
Now we can move to something that's actually quite humorous, which was the intervention of one of our young members at a town meeting of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where we had a young woman stand up and, in the best tradition of Jonathan Swift, discuss the idea that the solution to the crisis is eating babies. Helga, this went viral. Millions of people saw it. It's been commented on by everyone. What's your thought about this?
Well, I think this is quite amusing. Um, I tweeted an article by the Washington Post some years ago where they proposed that the Republicans should eat babies. So all this hysteria, should be seen in perspective. It proved one thing, that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is not the sharpest cookie on the planet, because while this young member was imitating Greta in a certain sense also, uh, she didn't get it, because she then answered that to the idea that babies should be eaten to save the world from CO2. She said, yeah, there are many ways one has to find a solution. Many people didn't get it. There was a whole coverage first that the people thought this is just a normal AOC supporter. And if you watch this video, it's actually quite funny, because this young member spoke for 2 minutes at least, and all the audience was looking, and they didn't say, "Hey, come on, this is crazy. You can't eat babies," but they just thought this is a normal discussion. So it really shows you the lack of humor, the lack of intelligence, and I think it. Some people really got it, like Tucker Carlson, and I think Pat Lang and a couple of other commentaries really got the point. So I can only invite you, our audience, don't miss this video, because it's good political satire of the first class.
And also, we had a comment this week from Russian President Putin on Greta, which you may want to share with people.
Yeah, I think that is quite important. Putin at the Russian Energy Week International Forum commented on that, and I think what he said there is very worth mentioning, because he said, well, maybe Greta is a sincere girl, but the people who are using her, this is absolutely to be condemned, because to rile up extreme emotions in young people, which can destroy their character, is something one should absolutely not do. And if you have seen this poor girl Greta, when she really is out of besides herself, I mean, you really fear that some emotional damage will be inflicted on her by all of this publicity. And then Putin also made another point, which I think people should really reflect about. Uh, he said, apparently nobody explained to Greta that the world is very complex, and that the Asians and the Africans, they insist that they want to have similar benefits from the economy like people in Sweden. And basically, are you telling them that they should stay in poverty for the next 30 years, and their children another 30 years? And I think this is a very important point, because given the fact that still 60% of the world energy comes from coal and natural gas, and if you actually take coal out of the power production for a continent like Africa, this means absolutely no development, and it means genocide. And should we tell the African young people that we are going to deny them development? I don't think that that is a morally uh, presentable idea, and people should really think about it, because many of these greenies, they are in Germany, for example, they belong, they're the party with the people earning the most money. They, they don't have to consider what it means to be poor in an African country or some other developing country. And, therefore they are so absolutely arrogant and have any lack of empathy with what is actually going on in the real world.
Well, I think it's important then to look at the counter to this. While central bankers are spreading pessimism through their funding of the green movement, and the regime changers are disrupting the potential for a community for a shared future to be brought into being, you were at an event yesterday, or participated in an event yesterday, which was quite extraordinary. Mankind is a galactic species, the necessary alternative to war. You gave a very stirring keynote, but there were a lot of very interesting participants. Uh, why don't you give us a report on what you saw, the potential for optimism coming from this kind of approach?
Well, this International Observe the Moon Day, this was started in 2010. So this was actually the 10th year where this is taking place. And, I, in my short speech, I pointed to the fact that there were, on that same day, more than 1,500 events around the world. Uh, 500 in the United States, 300 in India, and so forth, 300 in Europe. So if you look at the how many people participated, it goes easily into the hundred thousands, probably more the millions of people who have a healthy disease, moon fever. Moon fever is something, which is really very optimistic, because once you start to think uh, about making a colony, a Mars, a village on the moon. This, by the way, is not only planned by by China, by NASA, the Artemis program of President Trump, who wants to have a man and a woman on the moon in a little bit more than 4 years from now, and a permanent station in 2028. It's the policy of ESA, the European Space Agency. The head of it, the general director, Mr. Werner, calls it Space for Zero, because he says this is no longer just for the spacefaring countries, but it's open to all governments, all companies, all academias, and all businesses to participate. And that is exactly the kind of open integration of space projects, which will establish a higher level of reason of international cooperation. Now, I think the question of space projects, the idea of not only going to the moon, industrializing the moon as the stepping stone for a city on Mars. China will start next year their Mars expedition to investigate if terraforming is possible on the Mars. They already have a test model for that in the desert Gobi, where they're training young people, astronauts and engineers for such future deployments. And if you build a city on Mars, you need a city, because if you want to have hundreds of scientists, you need thousands of people who support the city, who keep the systems going. So this is an absolutely fascinating idea. And I discussed also the work and the vision of my late husband, of Kraft Ericke, the German American space pioneer, who had this absolutely fantastic uh, idea, that it is the natural character of man to basically find new areas in space, that that man is a spacefaring species. And that has not just some very practical implications, it will be, a complete counter to the narrow-minded idea that we are living in a earthbound limited system. It has a deep anthropological meaning because, it's a question of what is the character of man. We are not animals. We can again and again overcome seemingly unsurmountable borders. And Kraft Erike, I like this a lot. He mentioned Homer, Homer's reference to Odysseus. When Odysseus started to basically go into sea with his ship, he didn't know where he would end up. The same more or less was true for Columbus, who, despite of the fact that he naturally had maps and had an idea, but he thought he would go to India. Then naturally Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space at all. I mean, the idea that man can leave the surface of the Earth and go into orbit. I mean, no animal would ever think that. I have not seen the nicest dogs or donkeys to discuss that they build a spaceship and, explore what is the far side of the moon like. So I think this is very exciting, and it instills a tremendous optimism because, once people realize that there are new frontiers of knowledge, they completely change their attitude and become optimistic. And I think optimism is, for the mental health of people, the most important, because if you're culturally pessimistic and you think there is no future, well, then all kinds of terrible things can happen, as we have seen in the 30s in Europe, where cultural pessimism was the basis for all what happened wrong in the 20s and the 30s. And I don't think we should repeat any of this, but we should have a different approach of reaching a new paradigm in the history of mankind. And space travel is one extremely indispensable component for that.
A video of the event yesterday is available on LaRouchePAC.com. And also, Helga, you wrote a leaflet for an economic renaissance of humanity and the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, which is also available at the website of LaRouchePAC.com, which people should use and get out as part of this spread of optimism. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I can only ask you, don't sit on the fence. This is a really, you may not think it in Germany, which is probably the last country where changes for the better will happen. But there is around the world a revolutionary spirit because, I think we are reaching the point Lincoln talked about. You can fool some people all the time, many people sometimes, but not everybody all the time. I think I'm getting this quote in the right way. I think we are approaching this because many people realize that there is something completely different going on than the mass media are trying to tell you. And people are not that stupid. So in the United States, I think we are on the verge of a really, maybe a revolutionary spirit, which is spreading. And I think the best you can do is join us, get active with the Schiller Institute, and be an active part of a change for the better.
Okay, Helga, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes, till next week.